The HSV Endeavour, a sleek, battle-ready exploration vessel, drifted just beyond the edge of an unfamiliar star system. Captain Elias Rains leaned forward in his command chair, eyes fixed on the swirling holographic display before him. The system was bustling with activity. Hundreds of massive space stations, sprawling orbital shipyards, and vessels of staggering proportions that dwarfed even the largest human warships. The sight should have been awe-inspiring. Instead, it was baffling. "Getting some strange readings, Captain," Lieutenant Carson reported from the sensor array. "Those ships. They're enormous, but their energy signatures are, well, they're weak." Rains narrowed his eyes. "Weak how?" "Power output is decades, maybe centuries behind our own. Shield harmonics are crude, almost inefficient. Their hull alloys are dense, but the structure, it's overbuilt, like they're compensating for something." A low chuckle echoed from the weapons officer, Commander Darius Holt. "So, we've got a bloated, decadent empire still swinging clubs while we're packing railguns?" The crew's reaction was a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Humanity had spent the last few centuries clawing its way through the stars, surviving wars, technological revolutions, and first-contact disasters. They had expected their next encounter with an advanced civilization to be a test of survival. Instead, they had stumbled onto what appeared to be an aging relic that still believed itself untouchable. Then came the transmission. A sweeping fanfare of orchestral music blared through the comms, followed by a voice thick with self-importance. "You have entered the sovereign territory of the holy and eternal Galactic Empire. Identify yourselves and state your purpose, primitives." Silence fell across the Endeavour's bridge. "Primitives?" Rains exchanged glances with Holt, then activated the comms. "This is Captain Elias Rains of the HSV Endeavour, representing the Terran Union. We come in peace." He kept his tone neutral, but the barest hint of amusement edged his voice. "And yourselves?" The transmission crackled before resuming. "We are the rightful rulers of the stars. You are trespassers. Surrender your vessels, and we shall grant you the mercy of servitude." The laughter started with Holt but spread through the bridge like wildfire. Even Rains had to suppress a smirk. He had expected arrogance. Most old empires had it, but this was something else entirely. "Are they serious?" Carson muttered. Holt leaned back, grinning. "Oh, this is rich. They're flying bricks with third-rate shielding, and they think they can intimidate us." Rains exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Let's not get cocky just yet." He opened the channel again. "We appreciate the offer, but we'll have to decline. We're here to explore, not kneel." The reply was immediate, and this time, the haughty veneer cracked just slightly. "You would dare reject the will of the Empire?" Another voice, different from the first, cut in. "Their technology is unusual. Their energy signatures do not match any of the known vassal species." There was a brief pause before the original speaker recovered his composure. "No matter. You will learn obedience soon enough." The transmission ended. Rains straightened, all traces of humor vanishing from his face. "Carson, any movement?" "Confirmed. Multiple vessels are breaking formation. 20, no, 30 capital-class warships on an intercept course." Holt let out a low whistle. Big response for a first meeting. "Not surprising," Rains muttered. "Empires like this don't negotiate from a position of reason. They only understand force." His fingers hovered over the control panel, debating their next move. They could run. Humanity's ships were faster, more maneuverable. But the thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. If the Empire saw them retreat, they'd take it as weakness. Worse, they might think Earth itself was vulnerable. He turned toward the helm. "Helm, hold position. We'll let them make the first move." Minutes passed, tension thickening as the Imperial fleet closed in. When they finally emerged into visual range, the sight was almost disappointing. The enemy vessels were colossal, their hulls adorned with elaborate gold filigree and intricate crests, as if their designers had prioritized intimidation over function. Their formations were rigid, symmetrical, designed for ceremony rather than war. Holt smirked. They look pretty. That's about all they've got going for them. Aboard the lead Imperial dreadnought, the bridge was alight with activity. Grand Admiral Selvar, a man who had never known a battle against an opponent that could truly fight back, observed the humans through his own holographic interface. He found them unremarkable. Their ships were sleek, almost minimalist, lacking the grandeur of Imperial craftsmanship. It was offensive. "Fire a warning shot," he ordered with a dismissive wave. "Let them see the power of the Empire." Aboard the Endeavour, alarms flared as a plasma bolt surged through space. It moved with ponderous inevitability, an outdated weapon launched from an outdated ship. The bolt dissipated harmlessly against the Endeavour's defensive grid, barely registering as a threat. Holt laughed outright. "That was adorable." Rains exhaled sharply. He activated the comms once more. "Admiral, was that supposed to be a demonstration? Because I have to say, we're not impressed." The Empire's response came in the form of a full barrage. Streams of plasma lanced toward them, but the human fleet reacted with precision. The Endeavour's point defense turrets snapped to life, intercepting most of the shots before they even came close. The few that slipped through splashed harmlessly against the ship's advanced shielding. And then it was humanity's turn. "Fire a warning shot of our own," Rains ordered. A single railgun round tore through space at near-relativistic speeds. It didn't just hit the enemy vessel, it punched through it, piercing layer upon layer of over-designed, ineffective armor before exploding out the other side. The Imperial warship convulsed, its engines flickering, before it collapsed in on itself in a chain reaction of detonations. Silence. The remaining Imperial vessels hesitated. The Endeavour and its fleet had not even broken formation. Selvar's hands trembled. This was impossible. No species had ever resisted the Empire, much less humiliated them. Rains leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Now, Admiral, would you like to try that again? Or shall we discuss terms like civilized beings?" The Empire had expected submission. Instead, they had found themselves outclassed, outgunned, and utterly unprepared. Grand Admiral Selvar stood motionless, his fingers clenched so tightly around the command console that his knuckles turned pale. The bridge of the Imperial dreadnought was eerily silent, save for the muted hum of failing systems and the distant groan of metal contracting under stress. Before him, the view screen displayed the impossible. A single human railgun round had annihilated one of his warships in an instant. A vessel that should have withstood sustained bombardment for hours had been reduced to nothing more than a drifting carcass. His officers dared not speak. They had never seen an Imperial fleet hesitate, much less falter. The doctrine of the Empire had been clear for millennia. Size was strength, tradition was power, and all who opposed them would crumble. But now, in the cold void of space, the very foundation of that belief was fracturing. Selvar forced himself to breathe. This was an anomaly, nothing more. The humans had merely gotten lucky. He straightened his back, drawing on the pride of his lineage. All ships, full assault. No more warnings. The command was met with a moment's hesitation. The bridge officers exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. But disobedience was unthinkable. The orders relayed, and across the Imperial fleet, weapons charged with renewed vigor. From his place on the Endeavour's bridge, Captain Rains watched the Imperial formation shift into an offensive stance. It was almost admirable how committed they were to their arrogance. Even after witnessing overwhelming proof of their inferiority, they chose war. He supposed it was inevitable. Holt exhaled in amusement. "Gotta hand it to them, they're persistent." Lieutenant Carson adjusted his tactical display. "I'm detecting power spikes across their fleet. Plasma batteries are coming online. Torpedo bays are cycling. Looks like they're going all in." Rains nodded. "Then let's finish this." The Imperial fleet surged forward in perfect symmetry, a wall of golden hulls bristling with weapons. Plasma bolts streaked across the void in staggering numbers, an overwhelming display of firepower. Against a lesser foe, it might have been devastating. But the humans had no intention of being a lesser foe. The Endeavour and its escorts broke formation with effortless precision, dispersing into a web of unpredictable vectors. Thrusters fired in chaotic bursts, artificial intelligence predicting trajectories and countering them before the enemy even finished firing. Imperial plasma lances slashed through empty space, their targeting systems unable to keep up with ships that moved like living things. The return fire was devastating. Railgun slugs, each one the size of a small vehicle, were accelerated to a fraction of light speed and punched through Imperial hulls like paper. Missile swarms, guided by near-sentient tracking algorithms, weaved through enemy formations and struck at exposed engine clusters and shield nodes. Within minutes, the Imperial fleet was in disarray. Their ships, massive and unwieldy, had no answer for an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. Frigates spun out of control, dreadnoughts buckled under kinetic barrages, and communication channels filled with confusion and fear. Selvar's hands trembled as he gripped the railing. This wasn't a battle. It was a lesson, one written in fire and ruin. He turned to his officers, his voice struggling to maintain its usual regal command. They are using forbidden weapons. No species should possess this kind of power. One of his lieutenants hesitated before replying. Grand Admiral, their technology is advanced, but it is not forbidden. It is merely beyond us. The word struck deeper than any weapon. Beyond them. The Empire had always believed itself the pinnacle of civilization, yet these humans, these upstarts from some unknown corner of the galaxy, had shattered that illusion with ease. Rains watched the battle unfold from the Endeavor's command deck. The enemy fleet was crumbling, their movements increasingly erratic. He had seen it before, the moment when an enemy realized they had already lost. And yet, something about this empire was different. There was no retreat, no surrender. Just blind, desperate stubbornness. "They're not breaking," Carson noted, his voice edged with confusion. "Most fleets would have cut their losses by now." Holt folded his arms. "They're too proud to run." Rains exhaled, considering his next move. The battle was won, but this war, the war of ideologies, was far from over. He activated the comms, sending an open broadcast to the remaining Imperial vessels. "This is Captain Elias Rains of the HSV Endeavor. Your forces are outmatched. Your weapons are obsolete. Your tactics are outdated. Continuing this fight serves no purpose beyond your own destruction." Silence. Then, the Imperial comms flickered to life. "We are the Empire," Selvar's voice came through, raw with rage and desperation. "We do not surrender. We do not bow to lesser beings." Rains sighed. He had given them a chance. The Endeavor's weapons lit up once more, and the Empire's last illusions of superiority were burned away in the cold vacuum of space. The Imperial Palace stood at the heart of the capital world, an architectural marvel carved from obsidian and gold, its towering spires piercing the sky like the fingers of a grasping hand. Within its grand halls, beneath the vaulted ceilings adorned with murals of past conquests, the High Council convened in an emergency session. It had been centuries since such a gathering had been called, not since the Empire had last crushed a rebellion so long ago that no one remembered its name. Emperor Halvros IX sat upon his gilded throne, his expression carved from stone. The room was filled with voices, counselors, generals, advisors, each speaking over the other in an attempt to make sense of the impossible. The fleet had been decimated. The humans, the so-called primitives, had shattered a battle group with effortless precision. This was not a skirmish, it was a humiliation. Grand Admiral Selvar stood at the center of the chamber, his uniform immaculate despite the defeat, though the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed his unease. He had barely survived the engagement, his dreadnought escaping only because the humans had chosen not to pursue. That fact alone gnawed at him. They had let him live. Not out of mercy, but because they didn't see him as a threat. "The humans wield weapons beyond anything in our records," Selvar said, forcing steel into his voice. "Their vessels move with impossible speed. Their shields render our attacks meaningless. This is not a mere enemy. It is a force that defies everything we have built." Across the room, Lord Minister Karvek, a man whose wealth outweighed his military knowledge, scoffed. "Your words reek of cowardice, Admiral. The Empire has stood unchallenged for millennia. No upstart species will change that. Selvar clenched his jaw. I watched a single human warship obliterate one of our heavy cruisers with a single shot. Their vessels are smaller, yes, but they are advanced beyond reckoning. If we do not adapt, we will be swept aside like dust in a solar wind. The council chamber stirred at his words. Some of the gathered officials exchanged uncertain glances, but others scoffed in open dismissal. The Empire had always ruled with unshakable confidence. They had faced rebellion, insurrection, even the occasional incursion from lesser races, but nothing had ever truly threatened them. And that was the heart of the problem. "We must rally our fleets," Karvek continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Crush these vermin before they infest our space." Selvar turned on him, eyes blazing. "And how do you propose we do that, Lord Minister? Throw more ships into the abyss? Watch as our fleets are torn apart, as our people die for nothing." He turned to the Emperor, his voice lowering into something colder. "Your Majesty, the simple truth is this: the Empire is not prepared for this war." The Emperor remained still, his fingers tapping idly against the arm of his throne. He had ruled for over a century, had seen countless conflicts, but none like this. The room fell silent, waiting for his decree. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but heavy with authority. "If what you say is true, Admiral, then we stand on the precipice of an era unlike any before." He leaned forward slightly. "What, then, is your recommendation?" Selvar exhaled slowly, knowing what he was about to say would shake the room. "We must open negotiations with the humans." The outcry was instant. Karvek slammed his fist against the table. Other counselors shouted, voices overlapping in disbelief and fury. The idea of treating these unknown outsiders as equals, of even acknowledging them as anything other than an infestation, was unthinkable. "You would have us bow to them?" Karvek spat. "Have we truly fallen so far?" Selvar met his glare without flinching. "I would have us survive." The Emperor lifted a hand, and the chamber fell into uneasy silence. "And if they refuse negotiations?" Selvar hesitated. "Then we prepare for war, not with arrogance, but with understanding of what we face. We cannot afford to assume our superiority any longer. We must study them, adapt, learn what makes them strong and what makes us weak." The words felt like treason, and yet they carried an undeniable weight. The Empire had grown complacent, blind to its own stagnation. That blindness had led them here, to the first real threat they had ever faced. Emperor Halvros stared at Selvar for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Send a diplomatic envoy. See if these humans are willing to talk." Karvek rose from his seat, his face red with fury. "This is madness. You would have us grovel before them." The Emperor's gaze turned cold. "I would have us endure." Karvek's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said no more. As the council adjourned, Selvar remained standing, staring at the grand banners of past conquests that adorned the chamber walls. Once, they had symbolized an empire without equal. Now, they felt like relics of a time already lost. The humans had come not just as conquerors, but as a mirror, reflecting the empire's own decay. And Selvar wondered if they would survive the image staring back at them. The HSV Endeavour hovered in the vast emptiness of space, positioned just outside the Empire's core territories. Around it, the rest of the Terran fleet maintained a loose formation, weapon systems primed but not hostile. The diplomatic envoy from the Empire was en route. Captain Elias Rains stood near the observation deck, watching as the Imperial vessel approached. It was enormous, larger than any human ship by an order of magnitude, but he had long since learned that size meant little. It moved sluggishly, its hull adorned with the same elaborate golden embellishments as the warships that had fallen before them. Even in diplomacy, the Empire could not resist posturing. Lieutenant Carson's voice crackled through the intercom. "Imperial shuttle requesting permission to dock." Rains turned from the viewport, adjusting his uniform. "Grant it. Let's see if they've come to talk or just to waste our time." The docking clamps engaged, and a hiss of pressurized air signaled the connection. Moments later, The airlock cycled open, revealing a delegation of Imperial envoys. At their head stood Grand Admiral Selvar. His expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions beneath the surface. He stepped forward, his ceremonial uniform pristine, though he no longer carried himself with the unshakable arrogance that had once defined him. Rains offered a small nod. Admiral Selvar. Selvar inclined his head slightly. Captain Rains. The two men studied each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Finally, Selvar spoke. The Emperor has agreed to discuss terms. Rains gestured toward the corridor. Then let's talk. The meeting room was stark in contrast to the Imperial grandeur. Clean lines, function over form, the hallmark of Terran design. Selvar and his aides took their seats across from Rains and his officers, the table between them both a barrier and an opportunity. Selvar exhaled slowly before speaking. The Empire does not negotiate with lesser species. He met Rains's gaze. And yet, here I am. Rains folded his hands on the table. That must be difficult for you. Selvar's jaw tightened, but he did not take the bait. The Emperor wishes to understand the nature of your people. Your technology, your military capability, your intent. Rains leaned back. That's simple. We came to explore. We're not conquerors. He let the words settle before adding, but we won't be subjugated either. One of Selvar's aides scoffed. Your people mock our traditions. Our way of life has endured for millennia. Holt, seated beside Rains, let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, and what did that get you? A fleet reduced to scrap in under an hour. Selvar shot him a sharp look, but Rains raised a hand, silencing any further remarks. What he means to say, Rains continued, is that your empire is built on outdated principles. You've spent centuries assuming your strength is absolute, that no one could challenge you. That's why you lost. Selvar's hands tightened into fists. We lost a battle. Rains nodded. And if you don't change, you'll lose the war. The room fell into tense silence. The Imperial delegation, so used to being the ones dictating terms, now found themselves at the mercy of a new reality. Selvar finally spoke, his voice measured. You ask us to change the very foundation of our empire. That is no small thing. Rains met his gaze steadily. I ask you to decide whether your empire wants to survive. Another silence, heavier this time. Selvar exhaled through his nose, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. And if we refuse? Rains didn't blink. Then your empire will collapse. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But it will. Because the galaxy doesn't stand still, Admiral. It moves forward. With or without you. Selvar stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what the future held. And that terrified him more than any war ever could.